So, Heghoulian, this is Anne Fallour. We'll go with that for now.
Okay.
Yeah, I know her from the States. You probably already heard her speak, and so you can discern that. But yeah, and she's kind of out in your neck of the woods now. I mean, from my perspective, it's your neck of the woods, but it's completely different countries in Europe. But
Okay.
It turns out Poland and Paris are the same time zone. I assume they're like 2 hours apart.
But, oh yeah. I keep forgetting whether we're in line with their highnesses in London or not.
Yeah, London is 1 hour behind you two.
Right. Yeah, I'm not used to being out in front of the rest of the states. And I was, my whole like years long now adventure through hell that I've been on. Most of the time I was out on the West Coast, being behind everyone.
Yeah, the only place more behind than here is Hawaii, and it's about as far away as Chicago time zone, but in the other direction.
Right. God, the Pacific Ocean is huge.
I know, right? That's the real workhorse of the oceans and their sizes. But yeah, so Heghoulian, I don't know if you're that familiar with Anne, but
we became mutuals in this past week after you mentioned that she would be on the call.
So, yeah. So what you two have in common is a kind of literary bent that I don't really have, but she is an author and it is also fluent in French, and it just kind of sort of Euro in that way. So just more generally, it's kind of the sophisticated vibe or panache, if that's the right word. I suppose maybe you could tell me.
Okay, I'm not sure if you'd call the French sophisticated right now. Everything's on fire.
He's here to raise the standard then, I think.
Oh, okay.
Usual conversations that we have.
I'll try and pretend to be sophisticated. I mean, I could probably pull that off. Like, what would a sophisticated person say? Here I am in Paris, where I can speak the language and order bread without starving.
Well, you could just say, you could talk about an Adam Sandler film in French. It's automatically sophisticated.
That's true. I mean, if I actually knew the plot to any Adam Sandler films.
Yeah. His overlap with what we call sophisticated is not high, although, or not large, but it's, Uncut Gems, Punch Drunk Love. I'm trying to think of like maybe the tiny handful of vaguely artsy films he's ever been in.
But he might be the perfect illustration of like where money and class do not intersect. Yeah,
they really are very different things. Yeah, he sort of represents in as far as political economy, maybe where the multimillionaire person who owns 3 car dealerships in the upper Midwest is at, right? Like the wealthy, but not what we think of as the elite, at least on the cultural level. But
right.
People like that are sort of operationally elite for lots of normal people around the country. They're the kind of people who will hire you or fire you or crush your even smaller business. So they matter a little bit more than George Soros or Klaus Schwab and whatnot. But
that's a very good point. Speaking of me being sophisticated, I actually grew up so far out in Bumblefuck, Wisconsin, that I thought there were like 10 millionaires in the whole world. And the people like that you're talking about were cranberry farmers. Like, they're farmers, but for a certain part of the country, they're like the cream of the town.
Yeah, there was like an Atlantic article a couple of years ago that, tried to sort of deflect from a lot of the right's rhetoric. They were saying this is the real elite, and, I thought it made a decent point, but a lot of what the right is talking about, it's almost like a mathematical formula. It's like 1 part wealth, a larger part culture, and maybe internationalism is the 3rd part or something, right? That's what they mean by elite.
Right. And leisure time. I think.
Yeah.
I think the right is, well, no. I don't think anyone who actually has money is that worried about Nepo babies and that kind of thing. I think maybe less successful Nepo babies are the most worried about Nepo babies. I don't know.
Yeah, it just goes to show how very convoluted and sort of cross-cutting a lot of class discussion is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so,
you'll have to pardon me. I skipped about 10 logical steps in there. I've been spending way too much time alone lately. So how are you guys?
yeah, I spoke to Heghoulian. I speak to Heghoulian every few months or so. He's sort of like a quasi co-host on my YouTube channel / podcast thing. And I don't know exactly why. We just sort of have hit it off in some kind of vibe manner, I guess. We have a similar taste in music, but I'm not literary though, and you're more literary than I am. Although people are literary in their own ways. To allude to something literary. But yeah, so Heghoulian, do you want to kind of give a bio to Anne?
Oh, okay. So the Heghoulian name is not that old. I guess I adopted that about maybe a year and a half ago, perhaps, on Twitter. And maybe even 2 years, I don't remember now. But anyway, before that, I had a few different names on Twitter.
Elon Musk?
Sadly not. No.
That was parody.
Yeah, well, I started on Twitter about 5 years ago almost. Yeah, and my thing has always been, I suppose, modernism, and I suppose I'm well known for posting about also Ballard, J.G. Ballard, and Jean Baudrillard. Really, those two, the sort of most associated with me. Really, those two figures.
Oh, okay.
And generally, I just a kind of person who annoys the right wingers a lot. Really,
you get along really well with my sister. You're talking about modernist architecture and novels, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's really her thing. She likes like where modernist novels meet modernist architecture. It's pretty cool. You'd love my sister, dude. Too bad she's already married, and I don't know whether you're. I'm sorry. Like I said, I've been spending way too much time alone.
Well, I am. Yes, I am. But it's But yeah, those are my interests as well. Yeah, the sort of modernist architecture, and had lots of heated discussions, shall we say, on Twitter about those topics.
Wow.
Yeah.
I like your sort of British left perspective, which I for a long time I sort of took the American conservative perspective as just gospel, and I it's only really in recent years how much I've come to realize how much under the influence it is of like business philosophy at a really deep level. And there's another wing of thinking out there, or I should say, not only business philosophy, but evolutionary psychology. It has really kind of fused those two in a big way.
Wow, yet, that's still a fad? I guess it's not a fad anymore. People are still.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the right now is they've taken. They think of like the marketplace is like this kind of bleak, nihilist, meritocratic kind of free for all that mirrors people's own lives. So business is cutthroat, but so is your personal life. If you get, we're fighting for sex, we're fighting for a share of the marketplace, and even if you're married, that's still no refuge from that fighting. Every day you've got to make sure that you remain both, sexually attractive and a status provider, or she's going to leave you. It's like a really bleak, like nature is red in tooth and claw kind of comprehensive philosophy.
Lord, go outside, get a pet, man.
Yeah, and there's this kind of a humanistic and not so merchant-oriented left tradition in Britain that I favor. But I stop there. I don't go all the way into the continental thing, because then it becomes sort of almost obscurantist and mystical and very, very heavily cultural. So I appreciate.
You want to hear something funny?
Yeah.
The French don't read Foucault anymore. It's only Americans.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Right.
Often.
Well, I think Baudrillard's book "Forget Foucault" must have had its effect in the late 70s.
Well, he deserves a hearty congratulations. I've never been a big fan of Foucault. You want to know how bad of a person I am? This is how terrible of a person I am. I'm a little butthurt right now because I was like, I about 10 years ago, and I gave up on it about 5 years ago. I was trying to describe, like, I'm not exactly moderate because I do have opinions. It's just I'm more worried about being correct than being on the left or the right. I just want to know what the fuck is going on because, like, A, I don't know how everyone else should live their lives, because B, I still don't understand what's going on. I just want to understand what's going on, but you have to have a political team or no one will publish your shit. So I was trying to articulate this, like, am I radical moderate? That's not right either. And all of a sudden, and it's just like when I, I wrote probably the first men's rights novel way before it was, well, that's probably a grandiose claim, but I wrote Nisquam way before it was profitable to write that kind of shit. And now I'm seeing all these people like sort of coming around all at once to, maybe not being a partisan Yahoo is cool. And they're all starting to monetize being moderate. And I'm like, God damn it. I knew this was going to happen because this always happens to me, but man, I wish I could figure out how to stop being so far ahead of the curve that I can't make money at it. And then people just laugh at you for saying you're too far ahead of the curve. And you're like, but look, I've been saying this for 10 years. And they're like, ha, and they trample you on their way to the bank.
Yeah, your best bet is to just somehow subtly prompt someone else to mention it on your behalf, because if you mention it yourself, it's bad luck.
Right.
The whole like anti-woke liberal thing is a huge growth industry. And which that sort of equals moderate, more or less, that.
Right. But my joke is, I've been wishing people would be more moderated for years and years and years. And could you guys stop being yahoos? And now I'm butthurt because everyone seems to be making money off of my idea now, but me.
Yeah. You were, to give you a little more background, you were like an editor over at TalkingMag for a while, and I'm not sure if Heghoulian's familiar with that, but it's sort of like a paleo-conservative American publication, online publication. Steve Saylor writes there. David Cole Stein, who is kind of controversial, but I think interesting. He's sort of like the hardcore free speech wing of conservatism.
That magazine
Steve.
has a lot of really interesting individual writers, but they don't really have this sort of like overarching editorial drive. You wouldn't say they're organized around a particular principle. It's just like, like you said, kind of paleocon and then interesting individual writers.
Yeah. Steve Saylor, he was on Alex Kashuta's show recently, and she's kind of this new generation of conservative. So that sort of helped him, raise his profile a bit. I should say, she's more conservative than I am. I'm not out that far, but like they put a lot of emphasis on, the almost Burkean connection between like past, present, and the future, and heavily cultural in a way that's a little too fuzzy for me. Cultural authenticity, almost like Herder, that German thinker, right? He just kind of leaned into that kind of thinking. So I'm too much of a kind of skeptical, radical uncertainty, classical liberal, neutral type to go in on all that stuff, but I think classical liberalism basically took that uncertainty a little too far in saying, like, there's really no, and I guess this would be the influence of psych in a way. We acknowledge sort of basic biological realities, what men and women need, and all of that, and so I'm that conservative, but I just went off on a tangent. In any case, let's see. I did make notes for what we can discuss here. I thought it was sort of interesting that, and you're in France and Heghoulians in Poland, and right now, as far as U.S. geopolitics go, they're sort of on opposite sides. There's a kind of French autonomy vibe going on right now, wanting to sort of strategize for its own interest, whereas Poland is, making sure that the U.S. knows it's a faithful ally. So have you seen any of that? Just in more like local politics, local Twitter. That's not a contradiction in terms.
Okay, go ahead.
You've been seeing a lot of like riots or whatever, like the city's burning. Does any of it have to do with what I just said?
I've pretty much, wow, I hope this isn't a huge disappointment, but I've mostly been trying to hide from the riots and write fiction because I've already been hospitalized by one French riot this year.
Oh God. Yeah, you said they've been carrying on like a dysfunctional American city. It's not this one-off riot thing, and then it goes back to being pretty nice and chill.
Right. It's just thing after thing after thing. Like, I mean, I can talk about that. That was a pretty colorful story. But as for giving like an overall feel for, and I don't know, there's the tradition of rioting in France is so long and complicated. Some people riot just to riot.
Yeah.
And
So does US influence loom really large in France, or does it seem like it's largely like French affairs that you just run into, just kind of the background media condition while you're out there? Like,
I mean, they write stuff about the United States, but they usually get it wrong. I mean, they're as far as their mainstream media goes, they do, and it's fine because it's France. There's plenty to report on in France, but when they report on the United States, they just take whatever the U.S. mainstream media feeds them,
okay.
and they don't do a lot of real original reporting. I mean, there are a couple of sites that do, but by and large, the French mainstream media is just translate American mainstream media into French, repeat it, and then go on to French news.
Ah, okay.
Which is fine. I mean, France is their business. The United States is less and less everyone else's business every day.
Heghoulian, you want to add anything here?
Well, in terms of Poland, we've currently got the ruling party, the Law and Justice Party in English, and this party is heavily oriented towards the USA, and by all accounts, Israel as well is an ally of Israel and the USA, and I suspect this is connected to links that go back to the Cold War, probably, with people like Kaczynski. Yaroslav Kaczynski was a dissident during the communist period, along with his brother, the late Lech Kaczynski, and various other peace figures were prominent dissidents, and they definitely had connections with the CIA and so on. And the other party, the main opposition party, which translates to Civic Platform, which Donald Tusk was leader of until his party lost in 2015. They are kind of more oriented towards Germany, I would say. So there's this kind of interesting dynamic of who controls Poland, which kind of is a long-standing dynamic, really, because in the 19th century, it was divided between three empires, the Germans, the Austro-Hungarians, and Russia. And nowadays, it's a kind of battlefield, I think, for America and Germany, really, for influence. And an interesting thing about Tusk is that research was done on the Stasi files, from the late 70s, early 80s, and his name appears in the Stasi files as a contact. So it seems it's difficult to establish exactly what he was doing with the Stasi, what was his relationship, but that the belief is, from people I've spoken to, is that he was an agent, a Stasi agent, actually. And there is a further suspicion that he has always remained a German agent, right? That he and this is how he got his prestigious job, with the European Union. What was he, the president, I think, was he, of the Commission? So straight away after leaving the Polish premiership. So that's kind of interesting. That he's got. Some people suspect that he's a kind of German agent, really. and so
Racy.
America, yeah, it's interesting. But I'm not sure how seriously to take that. Yeah, maybe he had some links with the Stasi, but it's not for sure that he remained attached, to Germany after reunification of the two Germanys. We don't know really. I mean, this is kind of rumors, but for sure, the Law and Justice Party are heavily, pro-America. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And they're in power. They've got an election coming up in the autumn, and that's going to be an interesting test, really, see where the future, what the future will hold. Then, if they stay in power or if they get booted out by the main opposition. That's it.
So, what is happening with the Ukrainian situation vis-a-vis Poland? The stem of refugees has long since dwindled, has it not? Or
well, I understand that officially there's about 2 million, but unofficially there's about 4 million, right? Which is huge, because that's like what 10% of the population of Poland. So I mean, it's massive, really. It's massive. And I don't know what that will mean for the long term, really, because it's put a strain on the public services, of course, and schools, etc. Yeah.
And do you see any of that in France? Are there Ukrainian refugees in Paris?
Not that I've really noticed, but they're kind of buried under the just constant flood from Africa.
Yeah, but you've got other migrant issues that are.
Yeah, and honestly, since Ukrainians already know how to deal with cold weather, you're not going to notice them the way you notice Africans.
What are Africans overdoing it in like bundling up for cold weather or something? Or
they kind of look like me. Just after I crawled out of the desert and I came to Paris, every time I visited this place from the United States, I was coming from someplace like Chicago or Wisconsin, which is just phenomenally cold.
Yeah.
I get here and it's balmy. I got here from the desert and I'm just like, French people are pointing at me and laughing because I'm just, 6 blankets, 8 sleeping bags. Just get completely acclimatized to California.
Yeah, you're climate-wise, and you're all over the place. Like Midwest forest, like Siberian level, like the middle of a continent is usually like much colder than the coasts. So you've got that going on, and then you're in the dry, super hot deserts of California. Europe doesn't have much that's like at all. I think Spain has a sliver of desert, but by and large, it's the desert is a very exotic and weird thing from a European perspective. And then now you're over in Paris.
yeah. Now I'm in Paris, just going, well, I guess I'm here now. Wonder where I'll be next.
So you know what? So Anne and I, we used to talk about. Well, I don't know. We talk about it so much, but it was kind of a thing in the air politically in our little corner of the woods in like, I don't know, the mid 2010s, the notion of anti-natalism. That seems to be extremely out of favor, and it kind of gets back to what I'm talking about this psych naturalistic turn of the right, who are now all about have as many kids as you can, just pump them out, just do it. They're almost jealous of the deadbeat dads on Maury Povich. They're like, they're out there, having kids they don't take care of, but they're winning at life in this fundamental way that you are not, you software engineer incel, So
right.
Anti-natalism seems to have it's very much out of fashion, and it does kind of harken back to a kind of 90s, population control kind of thing. But I was sort of on board with that, and personally, I still don't care about kids, but I'm sort of neutral. I can be just basically descriptive about this. I don't really have a dog in the fight, but I think it's interesting how the right is now all on board with pro-natalism and the whole theme of we're not having enough kids, and the underpopulation is now a big concern.
Have they looked around? I mean, I think I told you this the other day, Dane. Like one of the reasons that even if you put a gun to my head, I couldn't pick a political party. It's because if you asked me to like, okay, you got to pick one. How about the Conservative Party? I'd be like, well, it's full of people who actually look at this world and go, you know what we need? We need more people here. Like I just can't get on that train. I mean, like you said, personally, it's kind of hard to. The worse the world gets, the more objectionable it feels individually to bring a child into the world. But at the same time, since that whole thing came around and we chewed it up and spat it out, intellectually speaking, once, I realized, yeah, if all the nice people who don't want to hurt a child refrain from having children, the next generation is going to be all assholes. And that's not a good outcome either.
If I just can come in there, I think the subtext though of the conservative or right wing pro-natalist position is really not. It's not so much. There's not enough babies. There's not enough white babies. I think that's what it's really about. But some conservatives obviously realize it's a bit gauche to say that, and it's more the kind of people on the far right who are going to come out and say that openly, right?
I don't know. They seem pretty concerned with saving black babies too. Like they'll use that as an argument,
Well,
black
yeah,
people
there's sort of two strains. They're so kind of just Christian traditionalism and Cath trad thing.
Right.
That wing of the right, I think they are more just sort of universal about it. It's good. It's good for your life. It's good for your community to do all that. But there is a kind of like basically atheistic, naturalistic right that thinks of babies as ammunition in a demographic war. So that part is absolutely what I think Heghoulian is maybe speaking to. That's why I would define it.
Right. I see what you're saying. It's kind of a ready, set, everybody race to the bottom.
Right. I mean, it's funny. I was going to mention BAP here, Bronze Age pervert, but he's kind of not really encouraging guys to go and get married or something. But that is, the kind of part of the right which is most associated really with, the kind of we need more white babies and so on. But it's a bit confused, the messaging, it seems to me, because there's a lot of stuff about, the long house, like you don't want to be, sort of tied down to a woman, and so there seems like a bit of a contradiction there. But obviously I don't really see myself as on the right, but I'm sort of making some kind of conservative points, obviously, on my Twitter, on my Substack.
Right.
But I had a sort of some kind of classical left points also. I had a big discussion lately, about capitalism, and a lot of conservatives coming in saying there's no such thing as capitalism. That doesn't mean anything, this word. So that was pretty interesting. I didn't realize that they just simply didn't believe in it as a thing.
That's kind of what I mean about the American conservatism in particular being basically invisible to capitalism. To the extent they acknowledge what it does, it's like, well, it's as natural a part of life as procreation or the sun coming up every day. It's just not even a thing worth paying attention to that is really, that can be redirected somehow, or it can be finessed to get the outcomes they want. Policy wonk people aside, but just Twitter people by and large are just kind of like, well, they don't even realize how much they're in under the sway of I guess in kind of a capitalist realism, Mark Fisher sense, they can't even imagine anything outside of it. They don't know that they're in the grips of it.
Yeah, I mean, I've found like a lot of conservatives, not some of the big accounts there are a bit more knowledgeable, but a lot of the sort of middling accounts or small accounts, they have a very limited knowledge of economic history and how the economic regimes have changed over the years, over the centuries, really. They have this idea, okay, you've got feudalism and then suddenly you've got capitalism. But essentially, it's the same kind of trading, it's just normal trading. We've always traded stuff, kind of really dumb points like that people have made. And I've tried to say, it didn't just, it's not such a natural thing to have free markets, really. If you go back to, most pre-modern, all pre-modern societies, really, then there are restrictions, sometimes heavy restrictions on what you can do economically. And they don't seem to be aware of that, really. Or the other thing is, I've seen a kind of determinism from people like, was it the Eugippius, the guy who writes a lot about he used to write a lot about the pandemic. He's a German account, and he kind of sees it as a sort of deterministic outcome of technological and industrial development. You sort of inevitably get free market capitalism, and there's nothing you can do about it, essentially. Yeah.
That sounds like a weird inverted version of the socialist march of history.
Right. Yeah. So there've been quite a few debates about that, and I think they are interesting debates, but it's kind of difficult to talk about these things with some of these conservatives who just kind of say there's no such thing as capitalism, there's only liberalism, they only acknowledge the existence of liberalism, which obviously is a real thing. Of course, it's a real ideology, but I would say it's connected to capitalism, that the two things have developed in sort of hand, really, sort of economic freedom, personal freedom, have kind of gone together. And a lot of these conservatives think, well, you should have economic freedom, of course, but personal freedom, well, I'm not sure about that. Yeah.
Just think about how much things changed based on the invention and development of writing to be able to write up a bill of goods.
Mm-hmm.
Just that. I know very little about economic history, but it's fascinating. And as you kind of imply, it's sort of arrogant to presume that with just a tiny sliver of knowledge about the way trade routes develop, you can make sweeping proclamations like that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Adam Smith is really the key figure, in the development of capitalism, modern capitalism, going from, kind of mercantilism, which is kind of heavily regulated, international trade, really, to a sort of free market, sort of laissez-faire of the 19th century, which, the neoliberals of the 70s, early 80s tried to bring back with some success. They managed to bring this back, but I think their goals, their aims in bringing this back, at least their stated aims, to try and sort of restore sort of 19th century bourgeois virtues of self-reliance, prudence, and so on. I don't think those
on board with you, so you don't get scurvy.
I just want to say real quick that's kind of a strange. There's a combination of this kind of stoic self-discipline and sticking up and promoting markets, sticking up for and promoting markets, because the more that markets advance, the more economic progress means you don't have to do something yourself. Either some machine will do it, or you can hire someone to do it. And yet, like, tech CEOs themselves will have like this almost like military mindset, and a lot of they'll be listening to audiobooks about like getting into the right mindset and just thinking of things as some kind of daily war to stay
right.
Emotions and the conditions happening around you.
They all read The Art of War, right? Or listen to it.
I was just about to say that. It's a copy of The Art of War
in order to create an app that allows you to get sushi delivered quicker.
Right. Yeah. You don't read Clausewitz because he hasn't got the requisite sort of POC sort of kudos, right? So you read Art of War.
Right. The east side version of it.
Yeah. Also, Clausewitz is a lot longer, I think, his book. So.
Wait, wasn't there a third by Machiavelli? Aren't there 3 Art of Wars?
Yeah.
The Prince, yeah. The Prince is another popular one. Yeah. With the CEO. club. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I was going to try and make a joke about using the prince as an instruction guide, the same way you'd use Saul Alinsky as an instruction guide, but the joke just never really got off the runway. So
Right.
I'm just bringing it up post-mortem.
I think though the Prince has been quite influential. It's interesting that it was a big influence on left and right, because like James Burnham, who of course famously ended up on the right after being a Trotskyist, heavily influenced by Machiavelli, wrote a whole book called The Machiavellians. But also, on the opposite side, you got Gramsci, who wrote about, he envisaged a kind of revolutionary party of Machiavellians, a sort of Machiavellian revolutionary party, sort of drawing lessons from Machiavelli. So he's one of these figures who's a bit like Nietzsche, I suppose. Yeah, he's very influential on both sides.
Oh, I'm not saying it wasn't an instruction manual. It's just kind of funny when people just sort of unironically use these morally ambiguous things as this is my homework for tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I think when Machiavelli appeared, the Prince appeared, and he wrote quite a few other things like discourses and so on. It was pretty scandalous for its suggestion.
Sort of wrapped up with the Borgias.
He was in politics, and then it's interesting because he was in politics, and something forced him to get out of politics and to retire to his estate, his country estate. And there's a theory that he was kind of being a satirist, with the prince, that he wanted to reveal how, these people think. Yeah, this is only a theory, but that he wanted to show, how politics really works. And all the sort of Christian pieties were all, balderdash, right? So, but I think probably he was more serious in his intent, and that he was actually concerned about the fate of Florence. Of course, he was a great patriot of the city-state of Florence, and he just didn't want to see it misgoverned. I think. So he had this. What I've seen, some sources describe him as a rather, pagan attitude to life and the world. And yeah, I think that's what he was concerned about, really, about his city-state of Florence.
Interesting. That reminds me of a book I read a few years ago. I think the guy's name was Ryan Halliday. It was he was apparently
right. Yeah, that guy. His beat is sort of like stoicism, and but also just kind of revealing how like these new media, quote unquote, companies of the early 2010s operated.
Exactly.
Some kind of consultant on advertising. Yeah, I haven't heard from him lately though.
Yeah, he basically wrote this expose on himself. Like this is how we get you to click the levers and push the buttons.
Yeah, there's
something incredibly disgusting,
contradictory about that kind of move, because it makes you wonder. Well, okay, I guess I appreciate that you're confessing to this, but also, is what you're doing right now more of the same? How do I know?
Right.
How do I know you've stopped?